right, so I'm grateful today to be presenting for the CDRC annual meeting. I'm Jenny Taylor. I'm an assistant professor in neonatal perinatal medicine at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, and I will talk about the neonatal global rank score, its development, and future applications. I'm supported by funding from the awards listed on the slide as a co-investigator. Extremely premature infants are at high risk for death and multiple morbidities. The morbidities listed on this slide, such as necrotizing enterocolitis, bronchopulmonary dysplasia, neurodevelopmental impairment, intraventricular hemorrhage, and retinopathy of prematurity, are just some of many morbidities that premature infants face as they grow up. The past 50 years have seen huge advances in neonatal care. Neonatologists strive to further reduce morbidities and mortality, but researchers face many challenges. To reduce required sample sizes and to better describe clinical impact, researchers often use composite endpoints. A recent systematic review identified 76 large neonatal RCTs over a 5-year period. 54% of these trials used composite endpoints. The most common composite endpoints are death or BPD, death or disability, death or necrotizing enterocolitis. While composite endpoints can improve trial efficiency and clinical relevance in some cases, they are often criticized. For one, each component is assumed to move in the same direction, which is not always the case. Next, composite endpoints do not distinguish relative clinical significance of each component. For example, the composite of death or BPD, most, if not all, would agree that death is worse by far than BPD. Components definitions are many times inconsistent across studies or inadequately reported. Neurodevelopmental impairment is a good example of the last two critiques. Although there are some efforts to provide consistency across definitions, such as the NICHD's Neonatal Research Network definitions for its studies, other definitions are used internationally, and sometimes components are not fully reported, making comparison across studies difficult. These issues are by no means unique to neonatology. I will now shift from the field of neonatology to adult cardiology. As clinical care, especially reperfusion and acute myocardial infarction, improved and mortality declined, conducting future huge trials with several thousands of patients was impractical. A recent systematic review of major medical journals identified 140 trials that use composite outcomes. The most common components are shown on the slide as death and myocardial infarction, and I'll show additional examples later. The critiques and composite endpoints that I discussed on the last slide have led some cardiovascular clinical researchers to use statistical methods involving weighting or ranking. In fact, the figure on the right shows an example of ranking relative to perceived clinical severity of typical components of primary composite endpoints. The severity of each event type decreases from death onward, where death is the middle of the spiral, all the way down to rehospitalization or medical therapy. Now I will review two examples of ranked endpoints used in cardiovascular clinical trials. The methodology used in these trials is called a global rank score. This first is the CATCH-HF trial. I will review this trial to review the concept of a global rank score, though due to some limitations of the trial, they did not reach clinical significance in the overall endpoint, so there might be better examples out there. This trial considered whether non-invasive adaptive cerebral ventilation, seen on the slide as ASV, improved cardiovascular outcomes in hospitalized heart failure patients with moderate to severe sleep apnea. The primary endpoint was a global rank score with a hierarchy of death as the worst in the figure that is shown as blue. Then cardiovascular hospitalizations second, and the figure that is shown in red, and change in 6-minute walk distance at 6 months. If the individual patient did worse, then that's in orange. Same, that's in yellow, and better, that's in green in the figure. And this is between patients randomized to adaptive servoventilation plus optimized medical therapy, or optimized medical therapy alone, which was the control arm. Each individual in the trial only contributed to the primary outcome with their worst component. To illustrate this in a figure, the patients represented in blue were any patients that died during the study period. Red were any studies survivors who were rehospitalized, and orange were any survivors who stayed out of the hospital but did worse on their 6-minute walk distance at 6 months. And you can kind of follow the trends logically onward. This trial was stopped early due to results of another similar trial. This trial was thus underpowered for their primary endpoint. There was no significant difference in the primary endpoint, although the pre-specified subgroup analysis suggested a positive effect of adaptive servoventilation in patients with heart failure who had preserved ejection fraction, and that's abbreviated HFpEF, and is noted on the right side of the figure. And here the Cox p-value above is noted at 0.036. Another example is the STRESS trial. STRESS is a randomized placebo-controlled double-blind multi-center trial designed to evaluate safety and efficacy of perioperative steroids in infants undergoing heart surgery with cardiopulmonary bypass. Participants are randomized 1-to-1 to methylprednisolone versus placebo. The primary outcome is a global rank score with components and ranking shown on the right side of this slide. In trial simulations, study power was 21% for a mortality-only endpoint, 55% for a morbidity and mortality composite, and 84% for the global rank score. With additional covariate adjustment, power increased to 94%. Planned covariate adjustment was preferable to restricting to higher risk cohorts despite higher event rates in these cohorts. So the previous slide and this slide are just two examples of clinical trials using the global rank score and other similar hierarchical methodologies, but there are many other cardiovascular trials and even some outside of the cardiovascular realm that have used this strategy. Let's return to the field of neonatology. Neonatologists seek therapies to prevent or treat complications of prematurity, therapies that improve overall clinical stability, such as reducing hypoxemia, reducing hypotension, acidosis, the need for invasive respiratory support, or the number of central line days, could prevent not only death, but could reduce multiple comorbidities. Here, mortality and morbidities from the previous slide are reorganized into a preliminary neonatal global rank score. A neonatal global rank score is a possible solution to the problems neonatologists face. It would increase study power. It would increase clinical relevance by accounting not just for mortality, but also multiple morbidities. A universal neonatal global rank score would incorporate the most common morbidities with the greatest potential impact on a child's and their family's quality of life. By creating a universal global rank score for multiple neonatal clinical trials, we may be able to avoid some of the issues that have been noted by cardiovascular clinical trials. Standard definitions and rankings at the beginning could decrease research waste. In the future, individual trials could not only use the universal neonatal global rank score as we develop it, but could also modify it to make it more suitable for a specific disease process or therapy. The components and rankings shown on this slide illustrate the concept, but in reality, several other components and definitions of these components are being considered. The steps to develop the neonatal global rank score are listed on the slide. To date, in step 1, our steering committee of neonatologists, clinical trialists, and a parent of an extremely preterm infant narrowed and consolidated a list of 216 endpoints taken from a systematic review of recent large neonatal clinical trials and narrowed that down to 31 candidates for the GRS. These 31 candidates were presented in step 2 to key stakeholders in a REDCap survey as part of a modified Delphi consensus process. We're currently in step 2, which I will discuss more on the next slide. It consists of 2 more surveys for 3 total and 1 teleconference. Once the consensus process is completed and the steering committee finalizes the neonatal global rank score definition, step 3 is to statistically evaluate and develop the neonatal global rank score using real-world data. We will use the fluconazole prophylaxis in premature infants trial results available on DASH to evaluate the effect of the neonatal global rank score on overall trial results. We also plan to perform trial simulations to quantify how the neonatal global rank score affects power in different treatment scenarios. We are currently in step 2 from the prior slide, which is a modified Delphi consensus process. Key stakeholders have completed the round 1 REDCap survey. 56 individuals started the survey and 49 individuals completed the survey. The pie graph depicts the breakdown of respondents. In blue is the parent and NICU graduate stakeholder group, which represents 41% of the respondents. The majority of this group self-identified as parents, but there were some NICU graduates, or another word for that is just former NICU patients as well. In green is the clinician, researcher, and regulator group, which represents 59% of the respondents. The majority self-identified as clinician researchers, but some straight clinicians and some straight researchers took the survey, as well as a couple regulators. Our statisticians have given us a broad overview of the survey data, which we are currently reviewing and using to draft the round 2 survey. In summary, potential benefits of the neonatal global rank score are increasing study power, increasing clinical relevance by ranking outcomes by severity, and incorporating not just mortality, but other morbidities. And there's also the option of incorporating both efficacy and safety endpoints. For example, in the 2008 aggressive versus conservative phototherapy for infants with extremely low birth weight trial, the rate of NDI was significantly reduced with aggressive phototherapy, with these results seen in the table there. The composite outcome for death or neurodevelopmental impairment was not. The authors also noted that infants whose birth weight was 650 grams or less, 50% of those died in the aggressive phototherapy group as compared to 38% in the conservative phototherapy group, with a p-value of 0.03. In such a situation, in subgroup analysis using the neonatal global rank score, it may have detected a worse score in the aggressive phototherapy group in small babies, such as the author saw due to the increased mortality. Future applications of the neonatal global rank score include statistical refinement and hypothesis generation using real-world data, which I alluded to previously while I discussed the development of the neonatal global rank score. We plan to use the fluconazole prophylaxis in premature infants trial results available on DASH. The global rank score could be used in analysis involving other data sets, whether from clinical trials or preterm infant cohorts, such as those in the Environmental Influences on Child Health Outcomes, or ECHO consortium. Some of the statistical reviews I encountered discuss the role of the global rank score in scenarios with missing data, which is often a limitation in using real-world data. We envision the neonatal global rank score could be used as an endpoint in prospective trials, and also as a foundation for other neonatal global rank scores. Which brings me to neurodevelopment and how I plan to use my experience in the development of the neonatal global rank score to develop a specific neurodevelopmental global rank score for NICU graduates. Because clinical trials most frequently assess neurodevelopment at 2 years, we plan to use that time point. Through this process, we would strive for standardized definitions, as lack of standardization often makes comparing studies difficult. One common criticism of current neurodevelopmental definitions is that they assume equal importance of components such as hearing improvements that requires hearing aids, intellectual disability, and cerebral palsy. The ability to rank components using a global rank score could alleviate this issue. It is possible to include continuous as well as categorical components. So toddlers with GMFCS, which is a severity assessment cerebral palsy of 5, where these kids have no anti-gravity movement, could be differentiated from toddlers with a GMFCS of 2, and these individuals have a lot more mobility. We would again start with key stakeholder involvement and consensus building, as there are many different views on how issues with neurodevelopment affect children and their families. Here's a little bit more on what neurodevelopmental GRS could look like. On the left is the Neonatal Research Network definition for neurodevelopmental impairment. To fall into this definition, a child would need at least one of the following: a Bailey 3 motor or cognitive score less than 1 standard deviation from the mean, a gross motor function classification score greater than 1, and again, that's measure cerebral palsy, legal blindness, or hearing impairment. A neurodevelopmental global rank score could look like what's in the box on the right. This could help improve power and clinical relevance by increasing granularity and using severity ranking. As opposed to the neonatal GRS that I already presented, a neurodevelopmental GRS could be helpful in studies where neurodevelopment is the focus, such on trials for HIE, hypoxic ischemic encephalopathy, or trials to prevent intraventricular hemorrhage, as well as other analyses such as in cohort studies examining infant neurodevelopment. In summary, global rank scores have been used in various cardiovascular trials to increase power and clinical relevance. A neonatal global rank score is in development with input from key stakeholder groups to increase power and clinical relevance. Future opportunities include using the neonatal global rank score as a framework for specialized global rank scores. Thank you for your time and attention.